Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
And thank you, family, for coming. Kind of had to force somebody, I think, once in a while, but I just know that I've told my sons over the years that you need to scare yourself once in a while, and Mom's doing it today, so. I'll take those. April last year, I went to Egypt, and I just thought I would share a little bit about what I consider an interesting, mysterious country. And I went with a woman, I actually met her there, named Dee, who I'd met on a trip before. And I don't travel all that much, but I love to travel. And so she asked me to go, and I said yes immediately. And then she sent me an itinerary, and I read it and set it aside for about 4 months and kind of went with flow with it. I didn't research anything before I went. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about Egypt. Just a couple of quick facts. And I have this lovely map. And you can see this is the Nile. And just for reference, here's Cairo. And down here is Aswan, and is about 150 miles from the border. And 97% of Egypt is considered empty, which is not empty, but it's surrounded by desert. So that leaves 3% of the country for 117 million people. And Cairo the greater Cairo area has approximately 24 million, with a total of 2 stoplights that I saw while I was there. Didn't see any more than that. So also, ancient Egyptians believed in eternal afterlife and spent much of their earthly life preparing for this afterlife. And depending on who you were, depends what you thought was better before or after life, as a pharaoh or as a worker for the pharaohs. And Egypt is known for its pyramids. And the most famous is the Great Pyramid of Khufu. And it's the largest and oldest of the 3 main periods that are on the Giza Plateau. And Wikipedia, after I got home, I checked a lot of things on Wikipedia because I didn't beforehand. But Wikipedia says that it was built in 4,600 years ago. It has made from more than 2.3 million blocks, each weighing about 2.5 tons. Each base is 756 feet in length, slightly more than 2 football fields end to end. It rests on a limestone bedrock platform that is perfectly square and level to 0.8 of an inch. Think about that. It is, and what I found interesting, I've learned this, is that it's an octagonal pyramid, because it has each of its 4 triangular faces like this is slightly concave, about 30 inches, right in the very middle of it. And it goes down the center and divides each of those in half, okay? And the line can only be seen from the air at dawn or dusk during the spring and autumn equinoxes. There's also a theory that the 3 main pyramids were designed to align with the 3 brightest stars in Orion's belt. They currently don't line up. And I'm going to switch gears just a second here and take or leave what I say as you wish. Edgar Cayce was an American psychic who could put himself into a deep trance state and connect with a universal consciousness. He did not remember what he talked about while in these sleep sessions, which are called readings. That's what they called them. And a stenographer recorded the sessions. So Cayce discovered through readings for himself that he, in a past life, had been a high priest named Ra-Ta, who traveled into ancient Egypt with a group of refugees from Atlantis. It did exist, okay? to me. Okay, there he met an Atlantean engineer and master builder named Hermes Themistocles. Okay, and Wikipedia scholars say that, and historians say that he was a myth and as named after the Greek god of messengers. Casey's readings consider him to be equal to the Egyptian god of Thoth and say that he was a real person. So Ra-Ta and Hermes worked together on plans for the Great Pyramid that took 100 years to build and not 20 as listed in history.com. Casey readings say that stones were floated into place using natural levitation principles. This happened 10,500 years ago, BC. And the pyramids at that time did perfectly align with the stars in Orion's belt. So on our first day, hopefully, yay. We went to the Giza Plateau, and I have Dee and I traveled together, and we had a guide, Abdullah, who she called the godfather of Egypt, because he's lived there his whole life, and he knows people up and down the Nile. Really nice guy. And so I had traveled quite a bit more than 15 hours to get there, had a short sleep, and so we traveled up to the Giza Plateau. And that's the second, the Great Pyramid is right there. There's a third pyramid. Those are the three. And I was standing next to it and started hearing voices coming off of the walls, and I was kind of freaked out, and I literally felt that I'd gone back into ancient times. And Dee looked at me, and she saw my confusion, and then she said, "No, Dixie, this is one of the 5 call to prayers that they have throughout the day, and the mosques have towers with loudspeakers," and that's what I was hearing. So I was relieved, and then I became to look forward to the rhythm of the daily prayers. It was really nice. So we went back that afternoon, went back to the guest house, and about an hour and a half later, a man in a suit came by, and our driver, Muhammad, drove us up to the plateau again, where a lot of activity was going on, and we drove up with some others to the Great Pyramid. And this was after visiting hours. And Dee and I went, and an official went into what is called the robber's entrance. And So here's the entrance. You have to go down and then go up. We went over to the Queen's Chamber first, and it's about a long city block, and it's about as tall as this. It's 3.9 feet. And so you have to do it. And I stayed there a short time, went back to the Grand Gallery, went up to where the King's Chamber is, and we had to crawl through an area. Then we went to a small room, stood up, crawled again into the King's Chamber, which is here. The only thing in the King's Chamber is a sarcophagus, and it could not have come up the way that we went because it would not fit around corners. The main room is 34 by 17 feet with a 19-foot ceiling. So I laid down in the middle of the room and tried to meditate. And my mind was on steroids, kind of. Couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And finally, I moved over behind the sarcophagus where it was a little darker and leaned up against it and was able to meditate a bit. And it was time to leave. We went down and back. And when we got to the bottom, we had been in the pyramid for 2 hours. It's like very special. So the next day, we went to Cairo's 2 main museums, and sandwiched between that, we went into an old Coptic church. in Old Cairo, and it's the Church of St. Sergius and Bacchus, and it's one of the oldest Egyptian churches and still holds services. It was built during the 4th to 5th century, directly over a sacred cave, which is now a crypt. And you could see it there. You could look into it. They had like a plexiglass. And this is where the Holy Family came after leaving Bethlehem when Jesus was just a child, just like a baby, shortly after he was born. So in the chapter 2 of the book of Matthew, Joseph dreams that an angel comes and tells him that he needs to take his family to Egypt because King Herod's going to harm Jesus. And so he did, and this was before the Herod's massacre of the innocents, where, of course, they killed children, boys under the age of 2 in Bethlehem and around. So Wikipedia says that this was treated as, most modern historians and scholars treat the event as a thematic narrative rather than a recorded historical fact. And I thought, well, that's strange, because why would they have it in the Bible that you need to leave Egypt, and go to Egypt? That it's like, that doesn't make sense to me. What's this about? So, and while we were inside, we had a guide show us around, and there were a lot of pictures hanging on the wall of apostles and the Holy Family, and he came to this and he showed us this, and it's like this was them coming into Egypt, and who's this? It never said anything about it, but it's like, well, that's interesting. And of course, when I get home, I look up some of these things, and I wondered who she was. And getting ready for this talk, I jumped through a lot of rabbit holes, jumped down, and I found a book that I haven't read yet, but it's about Egypt, and I was browsing through it. It's called Edgar Cayce's Tales of Ancient Egypt. And I found a sentence in there that Cayce did a reading for a woman who he said was a maiden by the name of Josie. She was an incarnation of a maiden named Josie who traveled with the Holy Family and were guided by the Essene Brotherhood. And the family went back to Israel after Herod died. So then, of course, I looked into Wikipedia a bit and found something, just a little blurb about someone had written something hundreds years after this event, and said that there was a lady named Salome who went with the family, but that it's considered a symbolic figure. And to me, that didn't make sense either. So this, I went down a lot of little rabbit holes thinking about this, and but it seems it makes sense that the family they were guided by the Essene Brotherhood, and it's like, wouldn't you think if you were traveling with 2 women and a baby, you'd want somebody to guide you through a 1,200-mile journey? So the next place we went to was Sakura, which is outside of Memphis. It's the burial ground for ancient Memphis, which is the main political capital at the time. And this is where they had a lot of coronations, ceremonies, and festivals. And we toured the Step Pyramid, the Tex Pyramids, and also a beautiful underground tomb of a royal architect and court official named Tai. And this is it. And it had a courtyard. I mean, it was like a nice little house, and it was a tomb, but it was nice. I mean, it was smooth and really colorful. And then going back to the city, we were heading for dinner, and Muhammad turned a corner, and this is what I saw from the back seat. We had a few people heading the other way, and we were going towards them. And nobody in the car said anything, and I was kind of like, and the restaurant's over here. So we made it to the restaurant, and everybody got out of the van, and Nobody said a word. I thought, well, he, in the one way, he didn't, nobody said anything. So that's kind of how you're in the hands of God when you do that. So next day we flew to Aswan, down at the south, and this is much closer to Africa, the main continent, and I found it more colorful, the lively music. It's just a real pleasant, it just was fun to be there, and seemed a little more relaxed and stuff. And this is a picture of Dee, my companions, and Abdullah, and we stayed there a couple of days, and the first day we were there, Abdullah had been looking for a friend of his, and he had heard that he hadn't been at work, and this friend had a boat. And so the next day, though, there was his friend with his boat and his 2 sons, and they took us different places, and then eventually to the ship that we took for a 2.5-day cruise. But I remembered how he and Abdullah sat on these couches, and they were chatting a lot, and Abdullah was really going to town. Of course, I had no idea what it was, but that night, Abdullah told us that his friend had a fight with his wife, and that he got depressed and hadn't been on the river for 2 weeks. This is his livelihood. And so I just thought it was very touching that this man would get in touch with his friend and have a little chat, help him get out of the doldrums, and also he included a little dose of marriage counseling to the effect of, don't get into family business unless she asks for help. Don't get into those fights unless she wants to help you. So I don't know if anybody can relate to that. So we went on a Nile cruise for 2.5 days, and this is heading, the Nile goes from the south to the north as far as how it flows, and this was at night, which was a full moon, and it was just really nice. We did stop and see a couple of temples along the way, and then we were heading to Luxor. So we got to Luxor and we saw 2 of Ramses II temples, and one in Luxor and one in Karnak. This is the Karnak one. And you can see that there were lines of rams on both sides, and this is where, in ancient times, they had a lot of festivals and that type of thing there also. But Ramses was known as Ramses the Great. He ruled for 66 years, and he had 2 extravagant coronation ceremonies, one at Karnak and later at Abydos early in his reign. And all pharaohs would have coronation ceremonies and other type of events, but not to the extent of Ramses II. And these ceremonies were essential in establishing a pharaoh's legitimacy as divine. The pharaohs were divine. Okay, so outside of Luxor, we went to the Valley of the Kings, which has a lot of tombs, and they're still excavating. Also had a lot of tourists. And we went to, I think, 2 to 3 of the tombs. And this is Ramses IV, I believe. And the colors inside are still very beautiful. You're surprised, and they're vibrant. And for how long they've been there, it was pretty impressive. After that, we went to the other side of the valley to Dar el-Bari, okay? And this is where Queen Hatshepsut's mortuary temple is. Not a tomb. She was, I think, in the Valley of the Kings also. But when I'd seen pictures of this years before, I looked at that and I thought, wow, that is such a beautiful architecture. It looks timeless as far as you could see this here and not think that it was, Gothic or anything like that. It's just a really beautiful tomb or temple, and I never ever thought in my life that I would be able to go there and actually walk it and touch it. So and Queen Hatshepsut she declared herself pharaoh, and she ruled for approximately 21 years and was a very good ruler. She was very good for the country, and once she became pharaoh, she is depicted in her statues as a man. People would probably accept that better, although the female line is in Egypt. The power comes to the female line. So we left there and we're getting ready to head out of town. This is kind of a typical lunch/dinner that we had, and it was a lot. But we did a lot of walking. I ate pretty well. I never could get through all of the rice and stuff, but it was very good. Hummus and then we're heading out, and I saw this couple, and the guy looked at me, but when the picture time came, he looked straight, but I, through sign language, asked if I could take a picture of this young girl, and it was so nice to kind of connect with the local people instead of, tombs and temples. So I enjoyed that, seeing her. Our next stop, we had a couple more, but our next stop here was the city of Abydos, where Seti I has a tomb, and this is a very powerful tomb, I get them mixed up, it's a temple, and it wasn't finished by the time he died, so his son, who happened to be Ramses the Great, finished it for him, and this tomb or temple has 100 sandstone columns, and it's throughout the entire thing. It's shaped like an L, and it's one of the few temples that has a complete roof to it, and it's also very beautiful, and a lot of hieroglyphics in good shape. And if you have seen Ancient Aliens, they talk about there's a space, and it's in this temple, where you can see a helicopter, a submarine, and a plane, which other people say, oh, it was them bending their arms. And anyway, the three of them look definitely like those three things. This happens to depict Thoth, and he has kind of a bird face, and the god Horus, the falcon god. And this is Seti, and going from Pharaoh in life was considered Horus, and in death became Osiris, Horus's father. And Osiris is the god of the death and rebirth, and so he's divine in both areas. And what you don't see are these little, I don't know what it is, but up close you see it looks like rain, and it kind of goes back and forth, and that's energy. Abdullah was talking about, this is the energy going back and forth. This is divine energy. And here is a picture of some of the columns, and where you sit was about the height of a regular chair. It looks shorter, but through Abdullah's connections, which Dee and I got to go into a room and meditate for 20 minutes without any tourists around. And there weren't a ton of tourists here. It's a little offbeat in some of it. But I finally had settled down and had a really good meditation. And when we got done, we walked out into the hallway, and I smelled this powerful smell of cigar smoke. And I looked around, and I didn't see anything, and you're not supposed to smoke. And I asked Dee, I said, you smell that? And she said, no. And I said, okay. And so I walked about 10 more feet, and it hit me again, same thing. And I asked her, and she said no. So it's like, when I got home, I looked it up, and it said that no, cigar smoke wasn't in Egypt. It was tobacco's from the Americas. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. And then last week, I was going through some more things, and I asked about what was the meaning of spiritual meaning of cigar smoke. And it says, often it's a spirit guide presence and or an ancestral message prompting one to pay attention to your roots, family history, or inner wisdom. So I have to think about that one. Our last stop was up at Amarna, and this is, as you can see, the city is back there. Whoops. Come on. And, come on. And where you see the green, that's where the city is, and that's what a lot of Egypt is, green and then desert. And so along here is the hillside, and Akhenaten's tomb, he never finished it, was, I'm sorry, it was around the corner here. And up on this hillside were probably 18 tombs of people that were maybe like the master of the horses, the policeman, artisans, that type of thing. So there were 18 tombs up there. And if you recall, Akhenaten was what I call the rogue pharaoh. And he moved the capital, started his tomb in the hillside, and then he decreed that everyone had to worship, instead of their many gods, they had to worship one God, which was the sun god Aten. And Aten is represented by a disc, who it doesn't have a form, and it also has rays coming down, and at the bottom of the rays are little hands, which I thought was interesting. And his royal wife was Nefertiti, and she was considered pretty much as an equal. You see pictures of them and they'll sit equal, which a pharaoh usually sat higher than others. And I think this picture was him and then her. And a lot of times when these tombs get destroyed and defaced, it happened, another pharaoh would come in and it's like, we're going to raise this guy and we're going to put ourselves. So this was that, somewhat of that. But Nefertiti was on board with the one God, and like I said, she was kind of considered a co-ruler with him. But think about, you have lived your whole life worshiping many gods, and this guy comes along and says, one, that's like, and I'm talking to Ian, that's like someone telling the Denver Bronco fans that they have to cheer for the Kansas City Chiefs. It's a law now, okay? You have to cheer for the Chiefs. So when Akhenaten died, his son that he had with his full-blood sister restored the gods and moved back to Memphis, and that son was Tutankhamun. So not much is known about Nefertiti, and after his death, and her mummy has never been found, and of course there's theories. And Abdullah thinks she may have been murdered as she was not blood relative to Tut. And there's also a theory that her tomb is located behind Tut's in the Kings Valley. And my trip ended the next day, and recently I was talking to a friend of mine, Dennis, who I know from an Edgar Cayce study group, and he asked me, he said, were you meant to be there? Which is something I had never thought of. And but then I thought how easily everything unfolded before, during, and after the trip. And it reminds me of the line in the song is, don't question the way, everything falls where it's meant to stay. I didn't question anything when I took this trip. So I told Dennis, yes, I was meant to be there. So thank you so much.